Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
And like to visit a subject we've visited before, but it's top in the news. This is a special week dealing with what will happen about the waiver for the Iranians and what will happen to this agreement with the Iranians. And the opposition lining up. There's people on one side and Trump's on the other. But Trump has a lot of ammunition. He's head of the free world, so you can't tell what he's doing. I was just mentioning to you, and my thoughts were, I wonder what Trump goes through on a week like this. Does he know the significance of this? He's bombastic about it. Does he know what he's going to do? Is he playing his cards, or is he just sort of playing it day by day, minute by minute? I wonder if he has a strategy. That's a question we can ask, but I don't think we can answer it. But we can sort of set the stage for what's happening. Well, it caught my attention because we know the date's coming up, May 12th. He has to do something about the waiver. And the other thing that I like to draw parallels to are economic factors and what's going on. And now, oil is above $70 and Brent was above 75, which means that some people are being very cautious. This is not a sure bet, but it means that they're thinking there's going to be some problems there and that there may be an interruption in some oil flow. So that makes it even more serious. But some of the people are cheering him on. The neocons in this country are cheering him on, of course, because they don't want to see another waiver. They want confrontation. Matter of fact, their best foreign ally is Netanyahu, and Netanyahu last week, you know, he was bombastic himself in trying to present the case and declared how evil Iran was with statistics that were outdated, but he was caught at it. I think he should have been embarrassed by this. So now, but he's back at it again. He urged it. We got to confront him, and I don't think he said let's go to war. But that's what his policy is. I mean, he's willing to confront them militarily right now, and there's a lot of people in this country and a lot of people in the administration. So sorting this all out is difficult because, you know, Trump doesn't work on a consistent pattern. Who would have ever thought 2 months ago that there would be a possible peace treaty between North and South Korea? So who knows what's happening? But right now, this looks like it's going to be very difficult for him to come up with an in-between answer, but I think that's what he would have to do. But he has a lot of people in opposition to him, like the Europeans, the European Union, and most of the, I guess everybody that has signed the agreement. They don't want him to stop it because he can't, I don't think he has the option of saying, well, we're tired of it and we're going to get out of this international organization and nobody will notice and we're going to leave. Most people, including the Iranians, if the United States breaks this agreement and walks away, that means big trouble, and they will have some ways of retaliating. So it's pretty messy, but it looks like something big has to happen one way or the other, maybe a big improvement or a big capitulation or a real problem by Friday. I would think Friday would be the day of the announcement because the weekend is coming up, but the deadline is on Saturday.
And once again, Trump is his own worst enemy. His bombast, I will never sign another waiver, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. Now he's talked himself into a corner where if he looks for some kind of a solution beyond breaking his word about the waiver or leading us probably to war, he can't do it. He's stuck. And it's not only our foreign allies. There's been a steady stream of our closest allies, the UK. Is coming, Boris Johnson, the UK foreign minister, is coming this week. We had Merkel last week. We had Macron last week, all trying to convince him. It's not only them, it's Defense Secretary Mattis. Don't pull out, he says. Even Secretary of State Pompeo, who is no friend of Iran, he says, well, you know what, guys, they are basically living up to the agreement. And even Mac Thornberry, no dove, who said he was against the original deal. He's chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, so a very influential leader in Congress. He said it would be a mistake for Trump to withdraw from the deal because, and this is a good point, it would erode all of our leverage. Because
Right.
essentially what that does is close the door to any discussions, any negotiation. The only thing left if that happens is war.
Sometimes I think that Trump is the opposite of Teddy Roosevelt. I think he'd like to be Teddy Roosevelt, but he really isn't. He speaks tough. He speaks strong. But generally, the follow-through has been, a soft response, almost the opposite. And what I'm thinking about is that he's talked real tough in campaigns. He talked real tough when he became president, and then he wanted to show how tough he was on what was going on in Afghanistan, and he decided, well, to test the biggest bomb ever outside of a nuclear weapon and drop it on, well, not for the purpose of a military strategy, not to kill people, but just to demonstrate, his strength, but try to minimize the damage. But what did he do when it came to retaliating against, the gas thing? He says, well, I'm going to punish them. We're going in there and we're going to bomb them. But he warns Russia. He finds 3 empty buildings and dramatizes, I am really tough. So I think his language is tougher. In a way, that's better than falling through and being as tough as his language. But it's sort of a reversal, which means what I'm thinking about, where is that in-between spot? Does he have something like that available, just for a pragmatic reason? Maybe he doesn't have to go to war to prove his point. And it looks like it's going to be tough for him to just say, well, I messed up. I'm going to give him another waiver. Next time, no more after this one. I don't think the odds are very good that he can say that now, or he will lose a lot of credibility. What will the neocons do then?
He's almost like he's psychologically destabilizing the whole country with this back and forth. It makes you wonder what it was like to work for him. A lot of people say it was great to work for, but I can imagine him having managers butting heads constantly and enjoying that kind of chaos.
Right.
But you mentioned the neocons, and I'm going to bring up a name that I know is near and dear to your heart, a fellow by the name of Giuliani.
Oh, yes, I remember him.
He's back now. He's got a job as Trump's lawyer. Trump's paying him as a private lawyer. To deal with the Mueller thing. Of course, he stepped in some hot water over that. But he also did a little gig over the weekend. He gave a little speech over the weekend to a group called the Iran Freedom Convention for Democracy and Human Rights. And he wasn't talking about being Trump's lawyer. He was talking about Iran. Here's what he said. Trump is as dedicated to regime change in Iran as we are, he told the group to a bunch of cheers. But what is this group, Iran Freedom Convention for Democracy and Human Rights? Well, it sounds good. But what it is a front group for the MEK, the People's Mojahedin of Iran, which we've talked about. It's a Marxist, jihadist organization that the neocons love. They were on our terrorist list for 2 decades because they killed Americans. It's a terrorist group. They only got off of it because of Hillary. And Giuliani's been on their payroll. He gets 20 to 50,000 bucks for every speech. So he may have made a couple $100,000 from these people. So did Bolton. So this is how we talk about influence in Washington. So here's he telling this group, not only he wants regime change, trust me, Trump wants regime change. Here's another thing, if you could indulge me for one more second. He said to the group, with Pompeo now on his right hand and his national security advisor John Bolton on his left, what do you think is going to happen to this agreement? And then he tore up a piece of paper and spit on it, to the applause of the audience.
Now, I need to know, where did you get this very important information? Did you get it from Fox or NBC? I mean, who's revealing this to us? I didn't hear it on the news.
Well, here's what's interesting. Politico, a mainstream publication, printed the whole story about this, and I got most of the quotes from there. But they didn't say a single word about the affiliation of this group, which I think is very shoddy journalism. All I did was plug in that name into Google. Boom, up comes People's Mojahedin. This is their front group. So what kind of journalist wouldn't reveal the kinds of backers that he's speaking to?
Yeah, the propaganda machine is working pretty well here, and that has to do with even involving the courts. A couple years ago, the Congress passed a law that said, and I think it was unanimous in the House, to be able to sue Saudi Arabia for their participation, in 9/11, which I thought was astounding.
Yeah.
That was sort of a plus for those people who are just conspiracy people, but they said they were allowed to sue them. So there's been an ongoing case, and it was before this judge, and he's had a ruling. It's not that he's given up on all the rest, but we haven't heard too much about Saudi Arabia receiving, any penalties. But they came up this week. The judge ruled that the Iranians have to pay $6 billion because they aided and abetted the 9/11 conspiracy people, which is so absurd when you think about it. I mean, here we have the Iranians are a Shia. They're also Persians. They also can't stand Al-Qaeda, and they also offered to help us, which we refused to take, after 9/11. And they're the ones who are getting fined and penalized for participating in 9/11. And so far, no word said about Saudi Arabia. This to me is so preposterous that you have a country, imperfect as it is, as ours is as well, will get all the blame as the greatest country of perpetrating terrorism, the Iranians. At the same time, our best buddies who are trying to clean up this mess, Saudi Arabia, and look at what the two of us are doing, in Yemen. So yet this goes by. This you will hear constantly on the news, both right and left, and they won't point this out. I don't think that nobody would point out the total inconsistency here, and this is not even trying to say that, well, they have a wonderful system in Iran. But I do know that Christians and Jews are better off in Iran. I think that's been documented. But nevertheless, I think that's part of the deep state propaganda. I mean, why would that appear last week? Because the money's not going to be paid, but it was just another attack to confirm that or to say, at least accuse and challenge, that the Iranians was part of 9/11. So
that's exactly, I'm sorry.
No.
That's exactly what the neocons did after 9/11. They said Iraq is behind it. The secret meetings, Mohammed Atta met with the Iraqi security in Prague. All of these crazy people like Laurie Milroy putting all these crazy theories. I think it's the same kind of thing. It's trying to, you're right, it's war propaganda trying to associate in people's minds Iran 9/11, Iran 9/11. It's also a great argument against interventionism, because the people in charge are either too evil or too stupid to know what's going on. If you think Iran was behind 9/11, you're one of those two things. And either way, it's a good case for us to stay out of the business.
That's right. Those conspiracies are unbelievable, and we should, expose them. And like what has been said is, I'm a conspiracy believer only on the ones that are true. Yeah. The ones that are lies, we have to expose. But I think this is going to be a very big week, on what's happening. And you could almost, if you had nothing else to watch other than the oil price, you're going to get a lot of information. Because let's say on Thursday, oil is $80 a barrel. Believe me, there's a lot of pessimism out there. And I'm not predicting that at all, because most of the time this has worked out, and most of the time Trump will back down and try to find a middle of the road, and he'll be able to get away with it. But it sort of puts we who believe in non-intervention in a pickle too, because we probably wouldn't even have been involved in all that negotiation, these treaties and agreements and all that. We would just offer a hand of friendship and trade and not worry about it and talk to one country. And Trump talks about bilateral agreements instead of having these big agreements, and yet we come up with this. But when it exists, it's sort of like under the circumstances when Reagan had a negotiated deal with Gorbachev and reducing nuclear weapons. Well, that was bilateral, but there were some international treaties. And so once they exist, I think you have to go for the best deal, and move it in the right direction. And right now, even though an absolutist on non-intervention would say, well, whatever he can do to ruin the treaty should be, but they've made a mess of it, and the best thing they can do is what a lot of politicians like Thorne Thornberry are coming around and saying, hey, this is a big deal. We don't need to do this. And then when you look at the statements made by the European nations and all the other nations who signed this agreement, there's a lot of pressure for us, to extend this waiver.
I wanted to ask you something about the oil, because I read something last week, I don't remember where, that it said, because Saudi Arabia does not have the best economy right now. They're in a lot of trouble. I read something saying they need $80 oil for their budgetary requirements. What do you think could happen if the deal breaks down and all that Iran oil goes offline and it shoots $80, $100 a barrel?
Well, that's a really, really big deal. It's hard to believe that would happen, but if it got out of control, what if there's a false flag? What if there's an accident that happened? And it could, but it's going to be devastating to stock markets and interest rates and government expenditures. People would, expand their armaments. I think that then what you see would happen is the areas where they're maneuvering for positioning, say in Syria, all of a sudden there would be an explosion of military action in that area. The explosion might eventually, be the Israelis against the Iranians. That's what's really driving this whole thing. I think it's the Israeli-Iranian conflict, along with Saudi Arabia, because it's the contest between Saudi Arabia oil and the Iranians, because that's been long-standing, and I can't see any good coming of it. It's would get much worse. And my suggestion was, what if it was 70 by the end of the week? And you're saying, well, what if it gets to be 80 or so? And the Saudis they're trying to diversify. They have a new king, and that's another individual that's a little bit unpredictable too. Exactly what he would do and how he would respond. But we used to go decades after decades and talk about Saudi Arabia, but you never heard much about their troops. It was always, do they support Russia or they support the United States in this thing, and they go back and forth. But now they're militarily involved, and they've subsidized terrorism, and they certainly are involved in Yemen. That is a real catastrophe there. And those kind of problems, I think, would get much worse, and that means it would spread, and that would be the worst thing that could happen, is the uncontrolled spread of the hostilities that are just sort of sitting there, and they're boiling, but they haven't boiled over yet. So this sort of pseudo peace that goes on, compared to World War II, it's pseudo peace. I mean, thousands of people aren't being killed, but I think that could change rather quickly.
That's interesting. There's before I close, I would just mention there was a good article in the UN's Review by Pat Lang, Colonel Pat Lang, who we've known for years. He was in the DIA, and he had worked a lot with the Israeli military. And I highly recommend the article, because he talks about a lot of really structural flaws in how the Israeli military works that I didn't realize. I'm not a military expert. But that just suggests that if they do get involved, they're going to suck us in a lot more. So that's
no doubt.
That's worth reading. But I would close by making an announcement that I'm very excited about. Dr. Paul, I know you're excited too. Although I know you don't like to travel too much, but we're coming back to Washington, D.C., your favorite town. Well, the reason we go there is because we got a lot of good speakers and a lot of friends there, but we're going back for the Ron Paul Institute annual conference. The grand announcement is the date is August 18th at the same place, the Washington Dulles Airport Marriott. I'll have more information I'll send around to people about the conference, but I just wanted to do a save the date. We're also looking for gold and silver level host committee members. These are people that put up a little bit of extra money to help us cover our costs as we plan. And in exchange, we give them some perks at the conference. We have some VIP receptions. You can rub shoulders with some of our speakers, talk to Dr. Paul in a private setting, shake some hands. So it's a lot of fun. So if you're interested in helping us sponsor, getting us from here to August, drop me an email. My address is up on the screen, and I'll give you some more of the details about a gold and silver level sponsorship.
Do we have to say we're going to Washington? I mean, aren't we just outside of Washington?
That's true. We're outside the Beltway.
But we're close enough, I mean, to be very cautious about what's going on, and they'll be watching us too. More and more people are watching us. More and more people are watching our station and commenting on what we're doing here. So I'm excited about what's happening. The conferences are very popular. It is true that I am not overly enthusiastic about going through the TSA lines. As a matter of fact, I detest them. them, and that's my biggest job, is to get psyched up to get on an airplane and go someplace. But the conferences are very, very important, and a lot of people are more excited each year the conference gets bigger. And I think there's more people thinking about it because of this necessity. And if they can understand it, we're every bit, if not more so, patriotic than those people who think patriotism means you support the military no matter what they do, support war no matter who started the war. So there's a big difference, because when we sort it out and you talk about non-intervention, I see that as the only reasonable movement toward peace and prosperity. That is what is our goal. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.